The Syrian civil war, now well into its second decade, is a conflict of immense complexity and devastating consequences. It has reshaped the lives of millions and altered the geopolitical landscape of the region. It is a conflict born out of the Arab Spring, a wave of pro-democracy uprisings that swept across the Middle East and North Africa in the early 2010s. These uprisings were driven by a collective desire for freedom, justice, and an end to decades of oppression. In Syria, the protests began in 2011, initially ignited by the arrest and torture of a group of teenagers who had painted revolutionary slogans on a school wall in the southern city of Daraa. This act of defiance by the youth sparked a nationwide movement. The government's heavy-handed response to these peaceful demonstrations, fueled by decades of pent-up frustration with authoritarian rule and widespread corruption, only served to escalate the situation. The brutality of the regime's response shocked the world and galvanized the protesters. As the government crackdown intensified, with security forces firing live ammunition into crowds of unarmed protesters, what began as a call for reform quickly transformed into a full-blown armed rebellion. The violence spiraled out of control, leading to widespread chaos and bloodshed. Defectors from the Syrian army, unwilling to fire upon their own people, began to organize into armed groups, marking the beginning of a brutal and protracted civil war. These defectors formed the backbone of the opposition forces, determined to fight for their country's future. The initial demands for democratic reforms and greater freedoms were soon overshadowed by the desperate struggle for survival against a regime seemingly intent on clinging to power at any cost. The conflict evolved into a multifaceted war with various factions vying for control. The Syrian people, yearning for dignity and self-determination, found themselves trapped in a nightmare. The humanitarian toll has been staggering, with countless lives lost and millions displaced. The conflict rapidly escalated, drawing in regional and international actors, each with their own agendas and interests. This external involvement further complicated the situation, turning Syria into a battleground for proxy wars. The war became a complex web of alliances and rivalries, further complicating the already dire situation on the ground. Various groups, both local and foreign, fought for dominance, leading to a fragmented and chaotic battlefield. The early hopes for a swift and decisive victory for either side quickly faded, replaced by a grinding stalemate that has left the country in ruins and its people deeply scarred. The prolonged conflict has devastated communities and shattered families. The conflict's protracted nature, coupled with the involvement of multiple external actors, has created one of the worst humanitarian crises of the 21st century. The scale of suffering is immense, with millions in dire need of assistance. Millions have been displaced both internally and externally, seeking refuge in neighboring countries and beyond. The refugee crisis has strained resources and created significant challenges for host nations. The war's devastating impact on Syria's infrastructure, economy, and social fabric will continue to be felt for generations to come. Rebuilding the nation will be an arduous task, requiring immense effort and international support. One of the defining features of the Syrian civil war is the extraordinary diversity of the groups opposing the Assad regime. This diversity is not just in terms of ideology but also in terms of ethnic, religious, and regional backgrounds. Each group brings its own unique perspective and set of goals to the conflict, making the opposition a complex mosaic of interests and ambitions. This diversity, while reflective of the multifaceted nature of Syrian society itself, has also been a source of significant weakness and internal conflict. The various factions often struggle to find common ground, leading to infighting and a lack of coordinated strategy. This internal discord has been one of the major obstacles to forming a unified front against the Assad regime. The rebel groups, ranging from secular groups advocating for a democratic and pluralistic Syria, to Islamist factions seeking to establish an Islamic state, have often found themselves at odds. Their rivalries are fueled by ideological differences, competition for resources, and personal ambitions. These ideological divides are not just theoretical, but have real-world implications, affecting everything from military tactics to governance in areas under rebel control. This internal fragmentation has hampered the rebels' ability to present a united front against the Assad regime, allowing the government to exploit these divisions to its advantage. The regime has often used a strategy of divide and conquer, pitting rebel groups against each other to weaken the overall opposition. This has made it easier for Assad's forces to reclaim territory and maintain control over key areas. The international community, eager to see the back of Assad but wary of empowering extremist groups, has also struggled to navigate this complex landscape of shifting alliances and competing agendas. Foreign governments and organizations have found it challenging to identify reliable partners within the opposition, leading to inconsistent and often ineffective support. The lack of a cohesive opposition has made it difficult for external actors to provide effective support, further contributing to the stalemate that has come to characterize the conflict. Without a unified leadership, the opposition has struggled to present a clear vision for Syria's future, making it harder to gain international backing and legitimacy. Adding to the complexity, the rise of extremist groups, most notably ISIS, further fractured the opposition and introduced a new level of brutality and sectarian violence into the conflict. ISIS's extreme ideology and brutal tactics alienated many potential allies and created additional layers of conflict within the already fragmented opposition. ISIS, with its apocalyptic ideology and ambitions of establishing a transnational caliphate, exploited the chaos of the civil war to seize territory and resources. They terrorized local populations and carried out horrific atrocities, further destabilizing the region and complicating efforts to resolve the conflict. The group's rise, while eventually contained through a concerted international effort, had a profound impact on the trajectory of the conflict. It further complicated the already daunting task of finding a political solution, as any resolution now had to address the presence and influence of extremist elements. The diversity of the Syrian opposition, while reflective of the country's rich social fabric, has also been a source of significant division and weakness. This fragmentation has hindered their ability to effectively challenge the Assad regime, and has contributed to the protracted and devastating nature of the conflict. The path to peace remains fraught with challenges, as the opposition continues to grapple with its internal divisions and the broader geopolitical complexities of the Syrian civil war. Section 5, Obstacles to Unity, Internal Conflicts and the Rise of Extremism. Section 6, A Nation Scarred, the Humanitarian Catastrophe of the Syrian War. Section 7, Shifting Sands, Recent Developments and the Resurgence of Violence. Section 8, The World Watches, Examining the Roles of Key International Actors in the Syrian Conflict. Section 9, Uncertain Futures, The Long Road to Peace and Reconstruction in Syria.